So hello, everyone. Thank you, John, for that wonderful conversation on continuous transformation. Now we're going to shift gears and we're going to talk about cybersecurity for the next 45 minutes. And cybersecurity is one of those topics that can be challenging to get a firm handle on. Oftentimes, when you speak to vendors, you get a picture like this. A lot of people call that slide 3, meaning that they tell you the sky is falling and that, unless you buy their product, whatever it happens to be, you're going to get this situation. Now, on the other side, oftentimes the message from the organization is one where we got this under control, we're doing good. And so I wanted to go through here and provide you and give you a little bit of balance. We'll certainly look at the threat. We look at the must-haves. These are actionable items of where the cybersecurity industry is. We'll take a look at some of the prime automation targets and make an argument that you really need to address this now using machines and some of the automation techniques that John talked about. And then I'll make some industry patterns and observations. The other thing that I'll notice many times listening to MIT presenters, it's like drinking from the fire hose. And I recognize that we are remote, meaning that I am competing against Facebook, email, and whatever else might be going on your home that at times can be quite distracting. So I encourage you to use the chat, and I'll open that up now so that you may make comments as I go through this content. I'll scan it, and at times I will make comments on what you mentioned on the chat. And so I'd like to add a level of interactivity. At the same time, I'll say if it becomes overwhelming, and this has happened before, I'll close it off and just continue. But please speak up, comment as I go along. The other thing as well is I will give you some activities. We will see some videos, and I will do at least one demo. And I'll adjust to content as I go on. To the time that we have. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started with that. And I'll start off by saying that there's a new normal when it comes to cybersecurity. At MIT, for those of you who have not visited, you may be surprised to know that hacking is not a bad word. In fact, there is a hacking museum. There's a hacking tradition. And as you can see there, the definition is at MIT, a hacker is someone who does some sort of interesting and creative work at a high intensity level. And I'll show you here some pictures of the hacking museum. And you can see here some of the things that have been done. The interesting thing on the campus is that they're done overnight. Nobody knows how they're done. And you can see that it took some thinking and some creativity to come up with some of the things that they're done. This one is of Master Chief, for those of you who got to play Halo, of the John Harvard statue at Harvard. Some more recent ones. And this one here starts to cross over into what we will be speaking about. Hacking a building lights to be able to play Tetris on it. And those sort of compromises that in this case, although it's for amusement, can start to disrupt the world of business. Morris Worm, Robert Morris, created the first internet worm. And this was the first widely deployed internet attack that had been presented. Now, it should be noted that Morris was not trying to create harm. He was simply trying to explore, much like in the spirit of the hack, the new possibilities on this new platform. He was the first person that was prosecuted in the United States for a cyber crime, and he's now part of the faculty here at MIT. Not related to what we did. This is not usually the way it goes. But this is a very different time and a very different type of compromise than what exists today. Today, the cybercrime industry, because it is an industry, is very well funded, has a lot of talent, and is creating products much like you are. And you can see here going down the list, there's a menu type approach, and you can buy everything from hacking a Gmail account, as you can see there, for $162, to hacking a corporate account, or buy-in denial of service attacks, which you can see there for $30 to $70 a day, you can have a denial of service. And you can even get a discount if you do it monthly. So this is a large global set of organizations that are creating products, just like I mentioned, and launching them against the world for profit. And this question of profit is an important one to understand, because oftentimes you can simply increase the cost of them compromising your infrastructure or your systems, and that disrupts their business case, which means they move on to someone else. We often call that defense here: you don't have to outrun the bear, you just simply have to run faster than the person in front of you. Now, the other thing that has happened as well is that the sophistication of the hacker, the black hat hacker, referring to the malicious bad actor, is no longer very high, meaning that there was a time where you had to dedicate yourself to learning these platforms, to finding those holes, to have a great deal of expertise to be able to compromise an organization. As you can see here in front of you, this is a menu-driven attack platform where you can navigate through these menus and launch password attacks, wireless attacks, social engineering attacks, and so on, with very little knowledge of the technology. And these platforms are very much like any other software product out in the market. They're actively maintained. There are extensions being made. There are patches if they fall on some on some part, and there actually the new vulnerabilities are integrated into this platform as well. So as you can see, the media often portrays this picture, right? The antisocial, highly intelligent, works in some basement type of worker. But what we see really is a very different reality. These are professional organizations that have staff just like any other, that come to work 9 to 5. And in fact, there's even areas of St. Petersburg in this case that have been identified by intelligence agencies as some of these hubs. Now, to give you some more recent information, you can see here some of the attacks that have been launched against the United States in this past summer. And as you can see there, 149 public reports were made, and 22 of them were made in Texas. Now, interestingly, the type of cities that were targeted were not Boston, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, but they were the small to medium-sized city, meaning that they could not afford the type of security systems and had the security teams that the larger cities had. And once again, you can see the posturing here of the cybercrime industry going for those organizations that are going to provide a win at a very low cost. And you can see there the type of attacks that they launched and how successful they were. And the response from cities varied from, let's hire a consulting team and pay millions of dollars, because this is what it turned out to be, to try to recover on their own, and really stumbling and having difficulty for months at a time. The other one that I should note, and this one's even more relevant because we're living through it, is the amount of increased attacks that have emerged because of COVID-19. And the reason for that is because the machines have come out of the corporate environment. You're now working at home, potentially not on your VPN, and at a very different surface level of attack. Your surface level of attack has increased. And so you can see here these reports from NASA that they've seen doubling of phishing attacks, exponential increase in malware attacks, and in general, just a platform or a new group of users that are being attacked because they have more vulnerabilities than they used to have when they were inside of the organization. Now, there's a few slides, 2 or 3, that I'll mention that if you remember no others, remember this one. And this one's important because you can see here that as time goes by, the cost to defend continues to rise, and the cost of attack continues to decrease. And so this is what we're faced with today. And as I go through the presentation, I'll talk about the threats, as I mentioned, and then I'll talk about best practices to address this difficulty. So, and why do we have this? The reason we have this is because we have an explosion of information technology in our world. Our dependence on digital infrastructure continues to increase. Think about what would happen if we had a major compromise in today's world where we're all working distributedly. The other reason is most everything that we do is being automated and have a software representation. So this is a very challenging environment, and it is something that we need to get right because we're going to continue our dependence on it. And with that, I wanted to jump to show you an example here, the first example with that in mind, to illustrate the ease with which you can compromise some of these systems. And the question I wanted to set out with was, how fast can you become a password hacker? And in order to start this, I want to share with you a video. I would play it myself here, but the bandwidth is not sufficient to be able to sustain everywhere. And so I'm going to paste into the chat, and let me select here, everyone. I'm going to paste into the chat this video. Go ahead and watch it. I will do it here locally as well. And it'll run about a minute. And so I'll give you a chance to watch it, and then we can come back. Okay, so that's just to give you a little breather there to change the pace, to wake you up a bit, and to share with you some comedy. But I'm sure many of us can relate to what's going on here. And let me go ahead and skip that. We have a password explosion, right? On average, every one of us has more than 25 accounts that we have. I have well over 100, as you can see there. And one of the facts is that we don't choose very good passwords. As you can see there, these are collected from the most prominent breaches that have existed, and you can see that the passwords are very poor. Now, if we think about the complexity of how a password gets created, it comes from the amount of choices that you have per character. You can see here that if you had a one-character password, you would have 95 choices. And you can see as well that you get exponential growth. And this is good. For every character that you add, you have more choices, and that means that the bad guys have difficulty. So I see someone from the attendee saying that they can't see the slides. Can somebody from the technical team confirm that you can see the slides? Okay, great. So it looks like it's just one person. So as I was saying, the passwords increase in complexity as you get more characters. And that's a good thing, right? Because we don't want bad guys compromising our passwords. Now, in addition to just the number of possibilities, the passwords are not saved in the clear, because then the system administrators would be able to see your passwords, and this is not good. And so what's done to them is called hashing. And I showed you here a very simple, really trivial example that would not be used for security, but it illustrates the process through which a password goes through. And you can see here that I've simply given numerical values corresponding to the alphabet placement to each of the letters in the word hello, and I would come up with a 52. Now, in the security industry, there's a number of these that have been tried and perfected or polished through time. And you can see here an example of a common one called MD5 hash. So my goal, again, coming back to the beginning, was to explore how easily one could become a password hacker. And to do that, I set out to find a good list of passwords to crack. a good password cracker and to be able to crack 5% of those passwords. Remember, I'm supposed to be a naive attacker, and so I'm looking here for low-hanging fruit, right? And so one of the things that you can do is that you can attack it with computation. We have the clouds that have millions of machines. We have GPUs that have tremendous processing power. And it turns out that they're very good at creating hashes. And you can see here that if I had 25 GPUs, I could navigate through the entire space of possibilities of an 8-character password in about 5.5 hours. However, I'm supposed to be a naive attacker. Most likely I would do it with my laptop. And I don't have 25 GPUs on my laptop, obviously. So this was out. And as it turns out, this approach of being able to explore the entire set of possibilities of what a password could be really is the last resort. As you can see here in 2009, there was a change in technique that came from understanding the patterns that existed in the first major password leak that existed. That was the password leak of rockyou.com that exposed 32 million plain text passwords. And as it turns out, we're not that unique in creating passwords. You would think that if we have to choose our passwords at random, all of us throughout the world, none of them would really be like another because we're all different. Well, it turns out to not be the case. We do choose similar type of passwords. And so this was leveraged to be able to attack existing password lists. And so the attack is the following. You take a word that exists from those banks of passwords that have been disclosed to the public, in this case, the one from RockYou. You generate a hash, and then you compare it to one of the hashes that you're trying to crack. If you have a match, then you found the password, right? And you can compromise that account. If not, you go on to the next password. And it turns out that machines can do this very, very quickly. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here and share my desktop and demonstrate this to you from my machine. So I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop. And then I'm going to go ahead and open up the file. And first I'm going to show you the list of passwords that I have. As you can see here, I have a list of 7,000 passwords, as I mentioned. It just goes on and on and on. And all of these are hashed passwords. And then I have the list of 32 million passwords from rockyou.txt. And as you can see, when I click on it, there's a lag because the editor is trying to load 32 million passwords, right? And so this is a very, very long list that stretches into the millions. If I go forward, you can see here I'm already at 8 million. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through all of these passwords, right? And try to match them up by hashing them against the list and see if I can compromise some of those passwords. That list of 7,000 passwords is a list that I downloaded from the web. And it's the sort of thing that gets posted when someone's trying to recover their passwords, right? And so you can see here what I'm going to do, even if you are not familiar with this particular tool, you can see there that one of the inputs is the very large, and I'm going to make my font bigger here, the very large file of 7,000 password and the huge list of passwords, rockyou.txt. And so I'm going to go ahead and run that. And as you can see there, one of the first things to note is these two lines down here, start and stop. And you can see there that it took 1 second to run through all of these possibilities. The other thing to note here is the amount of passwords that I recovered. Close to 2,000 from the 7,000. It's not 7,000 because some of that repetition that I mentioned. And you can see there that I was able to compromise close to 30% of the passwords on this file. And if I scroll up, you can see here the hashed password and then the recovered, again, recovered password in the clear. And so let's go back to our slides now and make some comments. I'm going to stop sharing my desktop and then move to my slides. And so you can see here from, let me go ahead and open up the chat in case there are any comments. Um, and you can see there that we compromised about 30% of them. You can see that a lot of the major password leaks go through this very fast phase of cracking 20% to 30% in 2 hours, as you can see there. And by the end of the week, most of those passwords have been compromised. The bank of list is also growing. The password list that I showed you is the worst possible list that I could have used. And so using that terrible password list, meaning only 32 million, take a look at what is available here on that slides. The number of passwords in the public domain are approaching 10 billion. And the only reason I did not download this to my machine was because it would have taken forever. And I think you get the point with the 32 million. One of the things to note that is positive about this is that you can use these hash passwords here to identify any of the new passwords that your employees are trying to create. And if you get a match against the existing bank, then not allow them to use that password because it's one that already exists in the public domain. A lot of the intelligence that you might derive from data that has come to other fields has come to this as well. We understand a lot of the patterns people use, starting a word with a capital, ending it with numbers. We all do it when we can't get a password to work. We simply add numbers at the end. We tend to replace S's with dollar signs. We tend to reverse the order of words because we think that will make them harder to guess. But all of that is captured, as well as a tremendous resource of data. And so in general, passwords have really hit a wall. And this is simply to illustrate, as I mentioned in the beginning, some of the vulnerabilities that exist and some of the sophistication of the attacks, even from a very naive standpoint, as I was demonstrating. What's good password advice? Use password managers. Obviously, don't reuse passwords. Biometrics are on the way. Multiple factors have been implemented by pretty much every organization out there in the last 2 years. Very few have them across their entire stack, which you need to do and you need to have. And so this is some practical advice. The other one that I would give is don't use those super complicated passwords. They're hard to remember. You need to write them down. I recommend using 3 very simple, unrelated words, and you can make use here of your visual memory. Think of some place you go to and pick 3 simple things from that place, and you can use that as your password. Don't do it off your desk because that's pretty obvious, the number of things that you have, but that tends to be a good recommendation. I want to jump next onto social engineering, and I wanted to demonstrate here to you something that does not have to do with technology. As you can see here, what the definition is: the manipulation of people into performing actions or divulging confidential information without technology. And the reason this works is because we would all like to make decisions in the following manner, right? We form some theory, create a hypothesis, observe the data, collect our information, analyze and validate that we've made the right decision, and then go again and again, much like John was mentioning with some of the frameworks. However, making decisions in this way is very slow and very expensive. And so we take a lot of shortcuts. And some of these shortcuts and some of these patterns that we have been captured by a couple of really good books. One is How to Win Friends and Influence People. This is from the 1930s. And another one that's fairly recent that's called Influence by Cialdini, as you can see there. And they really focus on 6 principles of persuasion. And I want to walk briefly through them here. The first one is reciprocity. If someone gives us something, we feel obligated to give them something back. For example, my wife will at times say to me, "Oh, these so-and-so friends have invited us over 3 times. We really should have them over." And I'm sure this has happened to you as well. If somebody gives you a gift, you sort of feel, you feel an obligation to give them a gift back. When it comes to tipping, all kinds of really interesting research has been done around how waitresses can increase or decrease their tip based on when they give you a mint, if they give you some candy at the end, if they give you more, Or if they come back and they say, you guys are so great, I'm going to give you yet something else, a dessert or something tiny. And that can make a difference of about 20% on tipping. And it has to do with uh, this obligation that we feel. The other one is scarcity. And I don't think I have to say much about this given the time we're living in and toilet paper. There's been other great examples there, like the Concorde, when they said they were going to cancel the flights of the Concorde. Nothing changed about the service they were providing, but overnight, the demand for those flights spiked up. Another one is a 30. Research has been done that has showed that if you show your diplomas on the wall for doctors, patients are more likely to follow through with the therapy or recommendation that you give to them. Uh, there's also interesting things when it comes to attendees, like Graham, for example, introduced me. If somebody else says something about you, that gives you more authority. And so there's some interesting patterns there at play. Another one is consistency. We don't like to be inconsistent. And this is interesting around politics, because if somebody comes by this week and they ask you to put in a small sticker on your window, supporting some political cause, and then if they come back next week and want to put a sign on your lawn that you might have objected to at first, they can remind you, oh, you're already supporting us. You can see there your sticker. So we'd like to now put this lawn sign. And you can get a much higher success if you do that. Another one is likability, and this is one's probably pretty obvious. And there's been some great research here in business schools around having teams get to know each other, establish some similarities, get to a friendly terms, and then negotiate. And the success of those negotiations is about 90%. Or the other control group that has been told, time is money, get to negotiation right away and try to work something out. And then it falls to about 50%. The last one that I'll mention here is social proof. Whenever we're not sure of what to do, we look around at what other people are doing. And this is something that can be leveraged as well. Hotels do it when they ask you to reuse the towels for environmental good. And some of them have had even more success when they start to cite to you, the patterns that other guests have used. And so that you feel that you're following along with other people if you are following their recommendations. And so those are the 6 principles of persuasion. And here I'll share with you another video. I'm going to go ahead and paste that onto the chat as well. And this is a demonstration of an attack. And I'm going to go ahead and put it into the chat window here. And I'll give you a chance to go ahead and watch it. I'll do the same here locally. Okay, so I ran the video in parallel, so I'm assuming most of you were able to see it. I know there's some difficulty in some, depending on where you are geographically. I know in the Middle East sometimes there's restrictions. In fact, this is why I don't have it on YouTube, because YouTube is blocked in some places. So I've gone ahead and put it directly. This is a site that we own, and so I hoped that this would work, but I know that there can be issues at times. So great. So let me go ahead and show you next. I'm going to ask you to have a poll, and if you can run the first poll to the technical team. And the question is very simple here. Would you have believed her? So you got to, for those of you who got to watch the video, if you can answer, if you believed, if you would have believed her, and try to answer honestly here, right? And to the technical team as well. I think it's a pretty simple one, so we can show it out. We can show it once the majority. Uh, yeah, so I think, you know, if we were all, if we're honest, most of us would have believed her. You can see there that, you know, over 60% of people believed her. The principles of persuasion that we just went through, a number of them are in play. If she were to have been a man, you can see that perhaps it might have even been more compelling. Some people say no, some others say, you know, men stereotypically, you know, are more flustered in a situation like this. Some other people say you can vary this with age. And if you start to see all of the things that you could leverage, it's surprising what you can achieve without even using any hacking tools, simply using the principles of persuasions that we just went through. When it comes to phishing types, there's also a great deal of variation, and phishing can be combined with these principles of social engineering. And you can see here that a great deal of investment can be made to target your top executives, and it's called whaling, and what we saw was vishing. And so it turns out to be, you know, we tend to disregard at times, oh, that's just phishing, you know, it's pretty not really a serious threat. And you'd be surprised by how effective it is. And so the next thing that I want to ask you here, and if you can run the next poll, is how effective do you think phishing campaigns are against MIT scientists and engineers? Widely recognized that we have people of high talent, intelligent. How often do you think that you know, how successful do you think phishing campaigns are against MIT scientists and engineers? And you have there 5 options. Well, they do that, Michael and team, if you can give me a time check. Um, so yeah, you can see there that the majority of them answered sometimes. There's some that say always. It turns out that they are highly effective, and one of the reasons you can see here, and this one's very recent. It says we encourage individuals to remain vigilant, and they start to give a number of reasons why. Uh, Phishing attacks are some of the most successful attacks that exist. 1 in 10 emails will be opened and clicked on. And so this is a general problem that if you couple it with social engineering and, you know, focused research, can be a very effective tool. And now I'll jump into the latter part of the presentation here. I'm going to go ahead and stop this share, and I'm going to switch my slide decks. I'm going to talk briefly here about automation and the importance of some of the top 10 that I mentioned. I'm going to go ahead and get my deck in place. And these are the top to do. So I'm going to run through these fairly quickly. One of the challenges in this presentation format is that we have semester-long courses on these topics. And so we're trying to give you here some of the highlights. We'll also give you at the end some link to the actual courses for those of you who want to know more. I mentioned at the beginning that I would flag, and I'm assuming you can see my slides, comment if you can't. Um, one of the things that I told you at the beginning is that, you know, there's a couple slides that for you to remember. This is one of them. What are the top things to do? Make sure you have accurate account information, especially as we move to the world of services. We talked about multi-factor authentication. Uh, Hard coding secrets is something that's often done. This is a very dangerous practice, something that is done regularly. People at MIT do it every day. It can have big consequences. This is one of the ones to watch. Restricting security groups, having an intentional data policy. I'll share these slides with you so you'll be able to see them more in depth. Centralizing logging. Everybody has logs. Do you have them centralized so that you can leverage them? Storage is cheap. I know companies that are generating a petabyte of data a day, and they're still keeping them for years at a time. Same thing that I said for groups goes for roles, and the other is to take action on these events that emerge, but to take action with a high degree of certainty. One that you can challenge your teams with, and this is always fun whenever you attend one of these events and you hear some new information. If you show up at your cybersecurity team's door and you ask them to rotate their keys, and the keys are what are used to access services, most teams are not able to do that. Defend your AI from attack, like John mentioned, and to include your security teams from the beginning. The other top list that I wanted to show you was the first things to automate: ticketing, policies, logging, threat detection, and alerting. Your ticketing is one of those things that all organizations have. Can you create them automatically? And can you resolve them automatically? Having somebody check on some storage bin that might potentially be open is tedious for a person and easy to do for automation. Assigning policies in an automated manner as well is the best practice. If you have people doing it, they make mistakes. Logging and the deriving rich information from them, as I mentioned before, not just having the logging, but being able to integrate it, bring all of the different parts together to be able to enrich that data and have actionable information for when you have an investigation to be able to take that action. When the investigation is in running, it's too slow. Threat detection in an automated manner, and more than that, to be able to do it with a high likelihood of certainty that something is a problem. Most systems generate millions of alerts per day. We have worked on creating a platform that can narrow it down to a handful that are actionable. And so this is one of the things that you want to be doing. Alert escalation as well. If a problem doesn't get solved in 15 minutes and it's a serious problem, to escalate to the next tier all the way till the head of the company. It's great motivation for engineers to not let alerts escalate. And I'm going to do my final slide deck here. I'm going to go ahead and close my other deck and share this last one. One of the most important patterns here is to understand that communication between the rest of the company and security tends to be very poor. The IT team, which you might think is security, but it's not, has the most successful communication with the security teams. But you can see here that new initiatives by line of business, research and development, and marketing have a high distrust of security organizations. Same thing when it comes to investment in cybersecurity. It tends to be done, the majority of it is done on compliance, risk reduction, as you can see there, through that lens, but new business initiatives get almost nothing. The same thing is true when it comes here to new initiatives spend in very important topics like artificial intelligence for security, and intelligent automation doesn't really get much spending or anything else. One of the most important ones here to mention is the Security Operations Center that I mentioned before. Only 26% of the breaches are detected through this mechanism. And the practice of having a team, highly skilled team, watching monitors like we see in movies really doesn't pay off. You can see here that the data shows that only 26% of all breaches are detected there. And so this is a practice that is much better addressed with automation. Most of the advanced security teams now have one single engineer in their entire global organization that looks at whatever falls down with automation. Everything else is automated. Investigations take too long, and these last two have to do with the communication challenges that exist between the business side of the company and the security. You can see here that only 25% of board members feel that they are understanding the threats that are being conveyed by the security teams, and no surprise then that only 7% of security leaders can financially quantify the impact of the breaches. This is what you might feel like. I want to try to bring these patterns together into 10, which is what most of the breach reports share. And you can see here a summary of findings. I will share these as mentioned, and you can see here some patterns that 43% of breaches involve small businesses, 70% were perpetrated by outsiders. You can see here that social attacks on the left-hand side, second top down, 33% of attacks, and some of the other commonalities. You can see that they change by year as well, which means that your investment on protection changes year to year. And so these are great lists to look at because of that. It also changes by industry. You can see here a chart of that. And I'm showing you here that in education, we are the industry that does worse when it comes to phishing, the highest of all organizations. And that's because one of the reasons why I want to share that with you. The frameworks are good places to start to give you some of the basics, but do remember that you are integrating the lessons from wars past, which means that this will only serve as a baseline, much like antivirus software. It only detects about 5% of what's coming to your machine, but you need to have it anyway. It's just a good practice. The same thing can be said about controls. John mentioned VUCA. I'm going to mention here chaos engineering. When something happens and there is a compromise, it is you do not want to be discovering things for the very first time. So chaos engineering is the art of breaking things purposefully. You know, you can give an example here with firefighters and how much time they spend training. Everything that you have will eventually fail. And so going through the exercise of failure is an important one. It's not running around with a hammer smashing things, but very careful, focused to be able to ensure you have the reliability that you think you have. This slide comes here from the principles of chaos, and ultimately, like we've said at a number of places here, it has to do with being able to do the scientific method and decision making at speed. Ultimately, DevSecOps, what John spent a lot of time talking about, is what the security teams need to have. There is a challenge when it comes to lack of visibility, lack of resiliency, lack of segmentation, and lack of automation. Visibility can be addressed with logging, monitoring tools. Resiliency has to do with a much more modular approach to your architecture. John mentioned about these small libraries in the millions, small pieces loosely joined, much in the spirit of the web. Lack of segmentation, don't have one giant monolith, have smaller pieces that are easier to secure, that are more resilient, and that you can replace version as needed. Automation, I just talked about the challenges that have to do with automation and some of the opportunities that exist. There's actually a tremendous amount more that I could cover, but I'm going to go ahead and stop there. And because I think I am at time, unless if by some miracle, I still have some time left. If you can let me know how I'm doing on time, Michael.